day, everyone. My name is Arsani Jimalang, and I will be discussing about doing local and oral history. Before we proceed, we have two objectives in this presentation. The student must know the local history and to know the oral history. So before we discuss further about my topic, let us first define what history is. History is the study of the past events, people, and experiences that have shaped our world, our country, and our lives today. It is the story of humanity, a record of our struggles, growth, and identity. The history subjects and courses usually taught to students in schools are Philippine history, world history, and history of Asia. The coverage is always expansive and taught in broad strokes of historical periods, of large spaces, and of prominent personalities. Little is known about the subdiscipline of local history. Let me first define what local history is. Local history is the study of the history of a particular community or a smaller unit of geography. It is a study of our every struggle and triumphs of ordinary people. So it incorporates the cultural and social aspect of a certain community. The local history reflects reality that our lives are shaped by a particular places, and yung mga lugar na yon is a major determinant kung paano tayo namumuhay as an individual. Debates, however, continuously persist on the definition of this subdiscipline, particularly in the subject of its study. Does local history study local communities, local institutions, local groups, local heroes? In recent studies, local history tends to cover all of these topics, and the one who studies local history is the local historians. If you're wondering what local historians are, local historians study the history of local institutions like churches. They also study the local economies, local heroes, and local events. Local history thus is also a broad and dynamic field inquiry that aims to have an in-depth understanding of a certain local. So, take note that hindi ang local history ang nag-aaral sa local communities, local institutions, local groups, and local heroes dahil ang nag-aaral dito ay ang mga manunulat or the local historians. The local historians are the writers of local histories. Like what I have said earlier, that they are the one who is studying the said topics. Sila yung mga nag-aaral at umiintindi sa past. And doing history in local, there is a person behind that information, which is the historian. The most compelling question, however, is why study and do local history? Bakit ba natin pinag-aaralan at ginagawa ang local history? Later on, I'll be discuss about that. In the first chapter, we discuss how history could serve as a repository of a collective memory. Such memory is important in forging of national unity through identification with a common collective past. Nevertheless, nationalism, like other ideologies, when taken into extreme, can produce the most horrendous of human tragedies. One of the commonly known human tragedy caused by an extreme nationalism is the atrocities of the Second World War that killed 6 million Jewish people in Europe were perpetrated by an extreme nationalist rhetoric propagated by Nazi Germany. Did you know that the Second World War was took place in 1939 when Nazi Germany tried to invade Poland? Unfortunately, it involved 30 countries and it lasted 6 years until the Allies terminated the sources of Nazi Germany. The second example is the totalitarian states at present, like the North Korea, also use nationalism in justifying the dictatorial and anti-democratic character of the country. In these cases of extreme nationalism, history is being used by states in forms of official national history to rally the people behind them. Balikan natin kung bakit mahalaga na pag-aralan at gawin ang local history. Kung kayo ang tatanungin ko, bakit nga ba mahalaga na pag-aralan ito? Alam ko na ang iba sinasabi nila na bakit pa natin pinag-aaralan, eh hindi naman natin magagamit yan. Mali po. because studying and doing local history is important because it helps us understand the roots, identities, and unique experiences of a particular community or place. We study and do local history because it reminds us that history is not just about famous people or big events. It's about us, our families, and our communities. It helps us appreciate who we are and how our local stories form part of the greater story of the Philippines. Also, local history can serve as a balancer of these tendencies na nabanggit ko a while ago. By showing the peculiarities and certain locals in a particular nation, region, or continent, studying local history can provide new alternative interpretation on the different aspect of a nation's history. Sa pamamagitan ng pag-aaral ng local na kasaysayan, nagkakaroon tayo ng mga bagong pananaw at interpretasyon tungkol sa iba't ibang aspeto ng pambansang kasaysayan. Local history also facilitates a historical narrative emanating from the people. Historians call this the history from below. Ultimately, studying local history shall provide new provisions and perspective on the already established national history. What used to be a generalizing narrative of the nation would start to recognize certain nuances and uniqueness in the experience of people coming from different localities in the nation. So sa kabuuan, mahalaga na pag-aralan at isagawa ang local history dahil ang lokal na kasaysayan ay isang mahalagang susi upang mas maunawaan natin ang kabuuang kasaysayan ng ating bansa. Pinapakita nito na ang kasaysayan ay hindi lamang tungkol sa mga malalaking pangyayari o sikat na tao, kundi pati na rin sa mga karanasan, kwento, at ambag ng mga ordinaryong mamamayan sa bawat sulok ng bansa. Sa ganitong paraan, nagiging mas makulay, mas totoo, at mas makatarungan ang ating pambansang kasaysayan. Thus, local history is not just aimed at opposing the discourse in the national history, but is also a tool of enriching these national narratives. Doing local history, however, is not an easy task. We all know that. Despite the seemingly smaller scope of study, historians are often faced with challenges in locating sources for local and specific objects of study. For example, it is much easier to study the life of national heroes than that of a local hero. Ang ibig sabihin ng halimbawa na ito ay mas madali nating pag-aralan o alamin ang buhay ng mga pambansang bayani kaysa sa mga lokal na bayani. Ito ay dahil mas kilala at madalas talakayin sa mga aklat, paaralan at media ang mga pambansang bayani tulad nila Jose Rizal, Andres Bonifacio at Emilio Aguinaldo. Marami nang naisulat na tala, dokumento at pananaliksik tungkol sa kanila kaya mas madaling makahanap ng impormasyon. Samantalang ang mga lokal na bayani ay kadalasang hindi gaanong kilala sa labas ng kanilang lugar. Kaunti lamang ang mga tala o dokumentong tungkol sa kanila kaya mas mahirap tuklasin ang kanilang mga kontribusyon at kwento sa kasaysayan. Sources abound on subjects of national importance but tend to discourage on local subjects. Nevertheless, this limitation should encourage historians to innovate and recreate local historical methodology. One important historical methodology to local history is oral history. So what is oral history? Oral history is important in the midst of scarcity in written sources, historical documents, and other material evidence. This method uses oral accounts of historical subjects, witnesses, members of the communities, and the like. Oral history enables people to share their stories in their own voice through their own understanding of what happened and why it happened. Well, history is a spoken history. It's the record of people's unique memories and life stories. It is usual, personal, remain, and reminiscent, and an alternative and complementary source to the document on which historians normally rely. Oral history is not only in a way in which historian can discover more about the past, bagkus nagiging daan din ito na magkaroon ng historical discipline in his own rights. It can be used to research family history, the history of particular communities such as village or street, or can contribute detailed knowledge to widen them. Okay? Oral history primarily relies on memory. The subject or the informant will recount his experiences to the researcher as he remembers it. In other instances, the informant will relay what he learned from his ancestors or older members of the community to the historian. Para maintindihan nyo, ang oral history, ito yung study of historical information about individuals' family, important events, or everyday daily life. This nature and definition of oral history cause positivist historians or those who subscribe to the belief that history should be primarily based on written documents to criticize the methods of oral history. Memory is seen as something that is faulty and inaccurate. At best, positivist historians see oral accounts as mere supplement to the history written from written documents. Alam niyo ba na ang gamit nila noon ay audio tapes, video tapes, or transcription or plan interviews? Yes, yun yung gamit nila noon. However, one cannot discount the importance of oral history in writing the history of underprivileged sectors and communities like the urban poor or indigenous peoples. These groups are usually left out on records. They were undocumented because of their status. In these instances, it is the task of the historian to search for alternative methods that will capture the experience and collective past of these communities. Sa madaling sabi, ang papel na ito ay nagpapakita na ang kasaysayan ay hindi lamang tungkol sa mga mayayaman o makapangyarihan kundi pati sa mga karaniwang mamamayan at tungkulin ng mananalaysay na isama at itampok ang kanilang mga kwento upang maging mas buo, patas at totoo ang ating pag-unawa sa nakaraan. Okay? In conclusion, local and oral history are important enablers in the development and enrichment in the discipline of history. Mahalaga na palawakin natin ang ating pagtingin sa kasaysayan. Hindi sapat na pag-aaralan lang natin ang mga kilalang bayani o malalaking pangyayari sa pambansang antas. Kailangan din nating pakinggan at alamin ang mga kwento ng mga ordinaryong tao ng mga komunidad sa probinsya at ng mga grupong madalas hindi naisusulat sa mga aklat. These efforts fill the gaps in the discipline by highlighting alternative areas of study and more methodology toward a more holistic, inclusive, and progressive study of our past. That would be all. Again, this is Arsani Jimalang. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you have gained new learnings about local and oral history.